Good morning and welcome again to all the attendees. I'm Roberto Calabresi from Kyoto Club. Today we can proceed with another appointment with our webinars of the project Sustainable Civil Society Dialogue for Sustainable Development. Today the theme is climate mitigation and adaptation strategies. For the first part of the webinar, the speakers are myself and Eugenio Barchiesi of Kyoto Club. Then on the second part, hello. On the second part, we have Giovanni Fini from Bologna Municipality, and again Piero Pellizzaro from Milan Municipality. I think that's it. That's all. I just can give the screen to Eugenio for the first part of this webinar.
I will start today with the first part of this webinar about climate change mitigation and adaptation strategies, with the part more focused on the European Union facts and figures about it. Actually, it's perfect timing because we have here in Rome today, I don't know how the weather in Turkey is, but today here we have 20 degrees in the 4th of February. So let's say the climate change effects are here around us. So I will start first with a brief overlook about the international framework. As you can see here, we have the Paris Agreement, which still is, after 5 years, the reference of the climate change international global commitments. So the Paris Agreement has been adopted in 2015, as I said, 4 years and something ago. As of today, all the 197 members of the United Nations Framework on Climate Change have signed it, while 187 parties have ratified it. There are still some countries who have not ratified it. As we all know, Turkey is one of them, but I won't go through this since we discussed it already with our colleagues from Turkey about the situation. I mean, it's everybody hope that also Turkey will ratify it soon. I just wanted to show you how the measure emittents have committed for climate change to reduce their greenhouse gases emissions. As you can see, while USA and Europe have commitments that refers to absolute emissions, even though USA refers to the emissions of 2005, while EU to the 1990. China and India refers to the emission intensity of the gross products. So it's slightly different, since this referring to the emission intensity does not mean that the absolute emissions should be reduced as the same amount of USA and the EU. So this is something that demonstrates how at international level, global level, the approach is different. By the way, of course, the central aim of the Paris Agreement is to strengthen the global response to the threat of climate change by keeping the global temperature rise this century well below the famous target of the 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, and to pursue efforts to limit the temperature increase to 1.5. This new target was considered as very ambitious at the time, while after the 2018 report by the International Panel of the United Nations on climate change, that is a panel of scientists, they pointed out that this should be absolutely the new target, so 1.5 degrees instead of 2. The Paris Agreement, of course, requires all the parties who ratified it to put forward the best efforts through nationally determined contributions, the NDCs, the so-called NDCs. The EU has been the first major economy to send its intended national determined contribution, so INDC, on 6 March 2015, so in advance of the Paris Agreement. So which are the targets? The signatories have agreed to reduce the CO2 equivalent emissions as 40% by 2030, and by 80–90% by 2050, compared to the levels of 1990. As I was telling before, these are different levels, different references. Anyway, as I said before, the 2018 IPCC report pointed out that first, the Paris Pledge are not enough as of today to reach even the 2 degrees target, and that 1.5 degrees is the limit to avoid the no coming back turning point. I mean, this, to not reach a level of part per millions of CO2 equivalent emissions in the atmosphere that would lead us to a no coming back point. In the picture, you can see the projection to 2100 if countries do not act. So if nobody does anything about climate change, we will have 4.5 degrees of increase in the global temperatures, which would be complete catastrophe, let's say. But also, following the current policies, we will reach anyway 3.6 degrees. I mean, these are projections. Is an example of the projection that have been doing. There are some scientists, some researchers on climate change who have even worse projections. Someone who have better ones. I mean, we chose the one in the middle, let's say. So these are trustable numbers, let's say. And in the end, you see, based on Paris Pledge, that's what I was telling before, we will reach anyway 2.7 degrees of increase. So it is still not enough. So why 1.5? As I said, to reach 1.5, the global net CO2 equivalent emissions from human activities must decrease by around 45% by 2030. So 2030 is in 10 years. It's a really ambitious target compared to 2010 levels. I mean, not to 1990. 2010 levels are already lower emissions compared to 1990, and reach 0 emissions by 2050. So this is a very, very challenging and ambitious target. And as you can see in the pictures I'm showing you, to reach 1.5, for example, a global level, we should renovate the buildings by 3–5% every year, which is really a lot. From 2020, so from these years, every new buildings should be 0 emissions building. 0 deforestation by 2020. Let's just think about what's happening in South America or in Australia. I mean, this is something really challenging. No new coal power plants. Even this one is a very ambitious target. So to reach 1.5, we should completely change our habits and the way of thinking our economic development too. And to reach, on the other hand, just 2 Celsius degrees, anyway, these are challenging targets too, because as you can see, the CO2 emissions must drop by around 20% net by 2030. So even 20% is a very challenging target. So until now, we talked about top-down action and decisions, but let's say the most important action, on my point of view, the action that is forcing at global level the governments to at least demonstrate that they are doing something is the bottom-up action, the massively joined campaigns calling for more action on climate change all around the world. For example, the most famous one are the young people of the global strikes for climate, who are going down the streets all around the world, but also the activists of the fossil fuel divesting campaigns. We will go through this in the coming slides. So now let's focus on the EU, since this is our target for today. So this is an overview of the EU climate strategies and policies that are in force right now. There is the 2020 Climate and Energy Package and the 2030 Climate and Energy Framework. The Green Deal, of course, that has been published in the last months. Also climate finance. We will see later how the European Investment Bank has changed its policies on climate, on carbon emissions, and the adaptation strategy, of course. So at European level, I decided to start by the year 2000, so a brief history about what has been done at European level, to not bore you and not go until the beginning of the world, let's say. So the first European climate change program from year 2000 to 2004 started by examining an extensive range of policy sectors and instruments who had the potential for reducing the greenhouse gas emissions. So some working groups have been formed. There is a list here, for example, industry, research, agriculture, sinks in agricultural soils, of course, forest-related sinks, so carbon sinking, de-emission trading, energy supply, energy demand, energy efficiency, and transport. Why these working groups? Because each working group identified options and potential for reducing emissions based on cost effectiveness, as well as impacts on other policy areas and potential co-benefits. So, for instance, in terms of energy security and air quality, which I didn't mention here, but of course are crucial sectors. As I was telling before, one of the most important and innovative initiatives is the EU emission trading system. We will have a dedicated webinar about this, so I won't go through it very deeply. But later on, I will just give you a follow-up about that. Then in 2005 started the second European climate change program, who just went a bit deeper, let's say, explored further cost-effective options for reducing greenhouse gas emissions in synergy with the EU's Lisbon strategy for increasing economic growth and job creation. So there are some new sectors here, some new working groups focused, for example, on aviation, on CO2 and cars, reducing greenhouse gas emissions from ships. So the additional measures were investigated on flexible mechanisms, for example, agriculture, sinks in agricultural soils, forest-related sinks, and the actions identified during the first phase, of course, were further developed for example, the E2 mass energy audit management scheme, or the motor challenge initiatives, the promotion of renewables in heating applications. Now let's go back to the current times, because the 2020 climate and energy package is in force until this year. So it's definitely adopted. There is a mistake here, sorry, because it's not 2018, it's 2008. Definitely adopted by the EU Council in December 2008. It's a set of binding legislation that ensure the EU that EU meets its climate and energy targets for the year 2020. So the famous goals for 2020, the 320s, so minus 20% cut in greenhouse gas emissions compared to the 1990 levels, the 20% of EU energy coming from renewable energy sources, and the 20% improvement in the energy efficiency. To meet these targets, the EU adopted many tools. I just give you a few examples of them. The emission trading system that I already mentioned before is the EU's key tool for cutting greenhouse gas emissions from, of course, large-scale facilities in the power and industry sectors, as well in the aviation sector, as I already told you before. The ETS, the so-called ETS, covers around the 45% of the EU's greenhouse gas emissions. And in 2020, the target for the emissions from these sectors is to have 21% lower emissions compared to 2005 levels. While the other sectors are covered by the national emission reduction targets. So these sectors are not in the emission trading system. They account for around the 55% of the total EU emissions, and are like housing, agriculture, waste, or transport, excluding aviation, of course. Other tools adopted by the EU, the national targets for renewable energy. So these are binding national targets. I mean, this is important because when we will go through the 2030 climate and energy framework, those are not, we don't have national binding targets there, but we have targets set by the EU, by the Commission, which still need to be adopted to be translated into national targets. While for 2020, we already have national binding commitments. So even on renewable energy, the EU member countries needs to raise their share of renewables in their energy consumption by 2020 under the RED, the Renewable Energy Directive. And these targets, of course, vary, reflecting countries' different starting points for renewables. For example, Malta has a 10% of is a target of the 10%, while Sweden has the 49%. Then there are the Energy Efficiency Plan and Energy Efficiency Directive, who are also binding targets for energy efficiency. Innovation and financing. The EU also financial support for the development of low carbon technologies, for example, under Horizon 2020. Now we go through the 2030 climate and energy framework. So the set of targets and policy objectives who will be valid starting from next year. So this has been adopted in October 2014, and the key targets are at least the 40% cut in greenhouse gas emissions compared to 1990 levels, at least a 32% share for renewable energy. This was initially 27%, has been revised upwards in 2018. And at least 32.5% improvement in energy efficiency, who was initially, also this one was initially 27% and has been revised upwards in 2018. About the energy efficiency, just let me open a small part of celebration for Kyoto Club, and because at European level we are member of the EUASE, which is the European Alliance to Save Energy, and other networks lobbying for more energy efficiency. And this revision of the target for energy efficiency has been obtained thanks to the efforts by the EU, by the members of the EU Parliament, who are also member of the European Alliance to Save Energy. So we have some part in that. Then the last thing about the climate energy framework is that the EU member state, each EU member state, is obliged to adopt integrated national climate and energy plans for the period 2021-2030. Roberto probably later will give you an overview of the Italian one. So this is a comparison between the 2020 and the 2030 targets, some numbers. As you can see, the numbers for the 2030 are really ambitious. For example, if you see the CO2 emissions for the transportation is very challenging, because minus 37.5% for cars means that the habits of the European citizens should change completely. Also, you see that the EU funds for climate for the programs 2014-2020 accounted for around 20% of the total funds, while in 2030 we should rise to 25%. So there will be much money for supporting actions for climate. So since today we will talk about mitigation and adaptation, let's have a look at the EU strategy on adaptation to climate change. It has been adopted in 2013, and of course it aims to make Europe more climate resilient. It focuses on three key objectives. The first one is promoting action by member states. So the Commission asked all member states to adopt comprehensive adaptation strategies and plans by 2017. And it also provided them funding to help them to build up their adaptation capacities and take action, and supports adaptation in cities through the Covenant of Measures for Climate and Energy Initiative. We had a webinar about the Covenant of Measure last week, so you will find it soon on our website and you can go deeper in this topic. The other key objective is the climate proofing action at EU level, by further promoting adaptation in key vulnerable sectors like agriculture, fisheries, the cohesion policy, ensuring that Europe's infrastructure is made more resilient, and promoting the use of insurance against natural and man-made disasters. This for Italy is very crucial instrument, and I know that Turkey also is being hit hard by climate change. So insurance against natural and man-made disasters is very important, in my opinion. The last objective is a better informed decision making. Of course, addressing the gaps in knowledge about adaptation and further developing the European climate adaptation platform, which name is Climate Adapt. Okay, so let's go to the very latest news, because as you probably already know, in 1 month ago, more or less, in December 2019, the president of the EU Commission, Ms. Ursula von der Leyen, presented the European Green Deal, which established as long-term objective the EU intends to be climate neutral in 2050. So, to achieve that, the Commission will propose a European climate law, turning the political commitment into a legal obligation and, of course, a trigger for investment. And the EU Commission foresees to mobilize at least 1 trillion of investments over the course of 10 years, of which around the half, so 503 billion euros as EU budget, so public funds for climate and environment. Let's have a look on an overview of how this Green Deal will be structured by looking at the just transition mechanism. The just transition mechanism will provide targeted support to regions and sectors that are most affected by the transition towards the green economy. So those countries who have the most difficulties to implement the transition to a green economy model, let's say, will be helped with this JTM, with this mechanism. It will help to address the social and economic effects of the transitions. It will focus on the regions, industries, and workers, so single citizens who will face the greatest challenges. And at least 100 billion euro will be mobilized for the just transition mechanism through what? Through, of course, first, financial support. So there will be established a new just transition fund of 7.5 billion, who is expected to generate at least between 30 and 50 billion of investments. There will also in InvestEU, a just transition scheme will be established, mobilizing 45 billion of investment, and a new public sector loan facility with the European Investment Bank, backed by EU budget, is expected to mobilize between 25 and 30 billion of investment. So the attractive conditions, although there will be for private investors by risk sharing for both public and private investors, of course. Transition plans for beneficiary regions to steer the investments, and just transition platform will be built to provide technical assistance, advice, and support. The investment plan of the Green Deal, as I said before, 1 trillion of investment is supposed to be mobilized over the course of 10 years. But you know, we also say, okay, these numbers are mobilized investments, so it's not public funds, it's not money directly invested, but it's actions taken that are expected to mobilize. Well, in this case, really the half of the EU budget, the half of this investment plan should be covered by EU budget, so directly by public funding. So as I said before, there will be technical assistance to help investors in selecting sustainable projects. The capital from EU and national budgets, so the public funding, the 25% of the public funding will be addressed for climate measures. There will be attractive investment conditions, so stimulating green investments with support from the European Investment Bank. And there will be, I mean, the 30% of Invest EU will be dedicated to projects that fight climate change. So additional measures to facilitate and boost green public and private investments. As we will go now through climate finance, so we will leave the EU policies to have a look on what has been doing in finance to reduce the carbon emissions. So as I mentioned before, massive campaigning calling for divesting from fossil fuels has been raised all over the world, been massively joined all over the world. I just showing you the one link when you can go to this website, gofossilfree.org, to have the latest updates. Let me check if we can see it, because I just wanted to show you some numbers about the divesting campaign. So as you see, 13.96, so nearly $14 trillion is the approximate value of institutions divesting. So more than 1,100 institutions joined the divesting campaign, and more than 58,000 individuals accounting for around 5.2 billions. You have it here also, the share of the kinds of institutions that are divesting. As you can see, for example, faith-based organization account for the 30%, educational institution 15%. We have governments at 14%, and really important, the pension fund at 13%. This is very important because the pension fund are the one that are most considered by the investors. So very big numbers. We'll go back to the presentation. Okay. So going back to the EU, the last numbers we have is for 2017, but the last years are more or less the same. So EU is the world's largest contributor to the international climate finance. As I said, in 2017, we had slightly more than 20 billion euros for public money. This table, you can see more or less some more detailed numbers. You can check it. It's but you can find them easily on the websites of the EU Commission. So the European Investment Bank, until, I mean, I didn't report it here, but until 2016, massive campaigns have been put in place all around Europe, calling the European Investment Bank to divest from fossil fuels. And after 3 years, in last November, a very big change, I mean, at least this is how it looks like, in the policy of the IB, occurred, let's say, because the EIB agreed a new energy lending policy, which has the following priorities. It will end financing fossil fuel energy projects from the end of 2021, so from next year. Future financing will accelerate clean energy innovation, energy efficiency, and renewables. The EIB group financing will unlock €1 trillion of climate action and environmentally sustainable investment in the decade to 2030. So it is more or less the same number we've seen for the European Green Deal. So these are important numbers. Then the EIB group will align all financing activities with the goals of the Paris Agreement from the end of 2020, so from the end of this year. Finally, this is the last slide. I won't bore you any longer. I just wanted to leave you with some notable news. Nice news that we have from Netherlands, because in the end of last year, on the 20 December 2019, the Netherlands Supreme Court has upheld the ruling ordering the country's government to do much more to cut carbon emissions. I mean, this was a fight started 6 years ago for climate justice, started in 2013 by the non-profit Agenda Foundation. There is the link to the news from the Guardian. You can have a look. By the way, it's the first time that we have a country called for acting more on climate, and so this is some signs of hope for all the climate activists. Thanks a lot to everybody for listening to me. Now I will leave the word to Roberto. I think maybe we can do Roberto presentation, and after we can see if there are any questions, or if there are already some questions. I don't know. I will check. Okay, no. Great. So I think we can go on with Roberto, and then if there are some questions, we will read them and try to answer to you at the end of our speeches. Thanks a lot again.
Okay, thank you, Eugenio. Thank you very much. My presentation will be a little bit shorter than Eugenio's, and I will try to show and explain the process, how a country of EU can meet the 2030 EU targets on climate change. I think I can go on and show you the process of Italian national the process of how Italy took action to meet these targets of climate and energy on 2030, and the Italian National Plan for Energy and Climate on 2030 is a fundamental tool that marks the beginning of an important change in our country's energy and environmental policy towards decarbonization. The European plan is structured in 5 lines of intervention. The process started on 2014 with the European Council of 23 and 24 of October that has approved the strategy for the Union of Energy in coherence with the 2030 Energy and Climate Framework approved by the European Parliament. This European strategy is based on 5 points: decarbonization, energy efficiency, fully integrated the European energy market, research and innovation, and safety competitiveness. But in summary, this plan is an integration and an update of different plans already approved in Italy, and this was a fusion of two plans already adopted. One is the climate change adaptation strategy, and the other is the national energy strategy. For the construction and approval of the plan, a double path was followed in 2019. First, a comparison with the European Commission, which has given its objective of the harmonization of energy policies between European states, and on the other side, a consultation with all national stakeholders. In particular, the Italian plan is the result of an articulated process. Start in December 2018. This draft of the plan was sent to the European Commission, prepared on the basis of technical analysis and evolutionary scenarios of the energy sector, carried out with the contribution of main public bodies operating on energy and environmental issues. In June 2019, the European Commission made its assessment and recommendation on the plan proposal presented by Italian government or by the other member states, because the process is similar to for all EU member states. The European Commission gave to the Italian proposal an assess positive, and then after that, during 2019, as I said before, a wide public consultation was carried out, and the strategic environmental assessment of the plan was carried through. After this process, in November 2019, Minister Patuanelli illustrated the general lines of the plan to the Production Activities Committee of the Chamber of Deputies. Finally, the plan was the subject of fruitful comparison with the regions and the Association of Local Authorities, which at last half of December, 18th of December 2019, finally expressed a positive opinion following the implementation of several significant suggestions. The definitive text of the plan was published just a few days ago on 21st of January 2020. What are the objectives of the plan? The objectives are the definition of actions for reduced emission of greenhouse gases, coping with the impacts of climate change, and reduce risk and preserve the well-being of population and natural heritage. It also makes use of various other contributions, such as some different documents and plans we had before. For example, towards a circular economy model for Italy, or another one is National Strategy for Sustainable Development, approved by the CIPE, is an interministerial committee for economic planning, or elements for a sustainable mobility roadmap, and another one is National Infrastructure Plan for charging electric-powered vehicles. Okay, which is the targets and this plan look at for 2030 for Italy? For renewable energies, share of energy from renewable energies in gross final energy consumption, the target is 30%, either than 32% of a EU general plan. And another data is the share of energy from renewable energies in transport. The Italian target is 22%, compared with 14% from EU targets. Also in energy efficiency, our targets is less 43% of consumption, with a comparison to EU targets of less 32.5%. At the end, the greenhouse gas emission targets are very close, because EU targets are less 30% compared on 1990 levels, and also in Italy the targets is similar, for less 40%. After the publication of this plan, the Coordinamento Free is a coordination for renewable energy sources and energy efficiency association. Is an umbrella association composed by 27 members plus other who joined into this only by like participants. This umbrella association make some comments to improve this plan, and for example, the first comments are about the process for phase out of the coal, using coal is subject to the realization of new plants, which is unlikely to be completed by 2025. The natural gas has a very important role in the so-called low carbon transition. In fact, the plan does not exclude completely the realization of new infrastructure, and this is not very good, as the new hub in Sardinia, for example, and foresees the empowerment of the existing one, the tap in Puglia, another example. It will depend on the cost benefits analysis. That means maybe this not going on anyway, this transformation, not in time anyway. Sorry. Another point is about the governance. Many ministries are mentioned to be involved in the implementation of the plan, because it's a plan very important, and but it's not included an horizontal coordinating structure directly referring to the presidency of the Ministers' Council, which would be the crucial tool for an effective coordination. Another point is a good point, is the foreseen modification of the current regulations and legislation for faster authorization paths. Another point is the renewable energy production sources. Share of the gross final energy consumption is reduced to 55% compared to the 55.5 foreseen in draft version. We had a reduction of the objective of the targets. Considering a rule of common use, the rate of the renewable energy is the gross final energy consumption should be the double of the electric one, -1%. If you consider the 30% for the electric rest, it should be 59% instead of 55%. Maintaining the 55% will force to pursue even more challenging targets. They are already very ambitious for heating and cooling. Another point, number 5, a good point also is the updates compared to the draft version related to the green, hydrogen, and many more details about energy efficiency in buildings. Number 6, about energy efficiency. The measures mentioned in the plan are mainly inadequate to the very challenging objectives on the consumptions. From 144 in 2020 to 155 in 2030 for the primary gross energy consumption, and from 116 to in 2020 to 104 megatep in 2030 for the final gross energy consumption. No news about the energy efficiency certificates, which represented a great tool in the past years and need to now to be updated. The plan refers also to waste and circular economy. However, only the waste management is mentioned, while it is not explained that the circular economy is completely different approach that applies to the whole life cycle of a product. I think I'm finished, and it was a short presentation. Hope that was clear, and I'm waiting for questions. We have a few minutes, 5 more minutes for answer a question. Thank you.
Okay, it's Eugenio here. There is a question asking, I would like to ask, do you know what amount of 2020 targets are achieved? Well, I mean, I can answer. I mean, we don't know the exact numbers for every EU member state, of course. Maybe we know something about Italy. About Italy, I can say that the targets for example, for renewable energies have been reached very early in 2012, if I remember well, or in 2014. But by the way, they have reached because we had a policy on incentives. We have massive incentives on renewable energies. But what has happened that we reached very fast our targets, and then after the incentives were finished, I mean, they were not renewed in the following ruling or legislation. Of course, with the end of the incentives, the renewable energy sectors didn't move forward. I mean, we didn't increase it more. So we are still at the levels of 6, 7, 8 years ago. And so this is an example of the fact that reaching the numbers does not mean that it's not always a positive situation, because if we compare it, for example, with Germany reached its targets much later. I mean, 2 years ago, if I remember well, but they reached it, let's say, with more linear trend. So they had policies on incentives more better designed. So right now they are continuing to increase the share of new renewables with the same trend that they had at the beginning. So I would say the 2020 targets are more or less achieved all around the EU member states, but there are some member states who achieve them in a way that they are already prepared to reach the 2030 targets, while some other member states, for example, Italy, need to redesign their legislation to find a way to achieve the 2030.
Hello, good morning, everybody, and thank you to Kyoto Club for inviting and involving us in presenting our experience. I will try to stay in time, but I wanted to show you two experiences about economic policies of the city of Bologna in Italy. So local policy. Two experiences deal. The first one with the climate mitigation. so the reduction of CO2 actually, and the second one with climate adaptation, so how to adapt the city, how to make your city, your local community more resilient in order to reduce and avoid the risks coming from climate change. We can go on with the slide. Okay, well, possibly most of you know where Bologna is. It's in the north part of Italy. Actually, the municipality of Bologna is the core of a small metropolitan area with almost 200 million inhabitants. We can go on. The distribution of population. We can go to the next slide. The distribution of settlement. So we can move to the next slide. As you can see, the picture of the city by night, the settlements are quite scattered in the territory. We have a certain experience in organizing our urban planning, considering even energy issues. So, as I said, we have some experience in combining the local urban planning with energy planning. The work we have done in the previous year was to single out some areas that we have called urban energy basins. Sorry for some slides being in Italian. And those basins are areas characterized by urban transformation in ongoing urban transformation, and some opportunities, for example, the presence of district heating or district heated areas, the intense presence of buildings with poor energy characteristics, and so on. So in the plan, we have when we prepared the urban plan, we have singled out for any of those areas some specific rules in order to have new settlements with very high energy performances. In the building code, moreover, we have defined some specific requirements for energy saving, for the increase of green area in private spaces, for water saving, and for the intelligent use of materials for building. So the idea was to recover as much material from existing buildings as possible. And what we've done was to foresee the possibility of building bigger volumes in case of in case the project showed that those requirements were fully respected. So there were some high levels requested. If the project could meet those high levels, then there was a bonus, an increase in the volume you could build. What about our energy planning? We have some energy planning framework. It has been already discussed in previous presentations. We have even a local framework, so both regional and metropolitan energy strategies. Within this framework, we have started developing our Sustainable Energy Action Plan, which dates back to 2012. So it's a rather old instrument. We are now developing the new one right now. As you already know, this plan has been prepared within the European framework of Covenant of Mayors. So I don't think it's you need to repeat what Covenant of Mayors is, but what is important is that this initiative of Covenant of Mayors was a very big success among Italian cities, and Bologna was one of those cities who signed the covenant and started preparing the plan. The idea was that the actions of our plan should be as much as discussed with the stakeholders, especially as possible. So we did a very deep involvement process. This is just an image of the starting meeting of this process in order to make everybody feel like he or she is a real actor of the plan. The pattern of consumption in Bologna is almost is this one. The pattern of CO2 emissions, sorry, which is more or less energy consumption, is more or less this one. So as you can see, the 28%, so almost 30%, is consumed in offices, in tertiary, in commercial building, while the 35% is emitted in existing residential buildings. So if we sum those two bigger parts of the cake, we obtain that 65% of CO2 emissions are produced by energy used in buildings, both services and residential. And this shows how important it is for cities to take the lead in the climate actions. As you can see, there are some other parts of the cake which are important as well, such as transports, industry, and so on. Okay, I think we can stop with this slide because with this presentation and skip to the other one, because after this the presentation will be shared. You can have a look at it or send questions, but after this you just have a detail about the actions and so on. So we can go to the second presentation about the adaptation plan. Okay. So I just was saying that we have an adaptation plan as well, but you can find the information on internet, or we can organize a further webinar if useful. But it's nice to stay on to be more specific on our energy plan, just because I think that even if there are so many different elements among Italy, Turkey, and other countries, but I think that there are even more common elements. So it's useful to enter into the details. For example, I mentioned that the two sectors which are more energy demanding in cities are related to buildings, namely services and residential. What about residences? Actually, you can see that the problem is not the amount of energy consumed in residences, but the fact that this energy, mostly heating in Bologna, this energy is consumed in a very ineffective way. Which means that new buildings should consume 90, now even less, this slide is not updated, 90 kilowatt hours per square meters per year for heating, while the average building, the average existing building, so included a new one and old one obviously, consume almost twice. So the real problem is not the consumption, but the fact that most of the energy used for heating is wasted. So there is a huge possibility for reducing the consumption in heating. What are the barriers for that? The first barrier is that almost half of those of the dwellings are heated with autonomous heating. They have a boiler in the dwelling, and so it's difficult to organize a massive substitution of the plants. Only half of the dwellings are heated by a central boiler or district heating. Another element is that most of the dwellings, 65 actually, are owned by occupants. So if you look at the building, a multi building with many flats, the building has as many owners as flats actually, and this means that it's very difficult to intervene in hard way, because there is not a single owner who takes care for the investments and who takes care for changing the structure of the building, but it's up to the decision of many people. Some of them are old people, some of them are not rich people, and so when we come to spending a lot of money, it's quite difficult. The rate of intervention on buildings is approximately 5% every year. It's a very rough number, but it's quite it's a good approximation, and it's more or less the same in all Italy. This means that if we achieve a good energy performance of all the 5% of buildings every year, it will take us 20 years to achieve a good energy performance of the whole city. Obviously, this is a very basic calculation, but just to say that we need to speed up. We need to speed up in some way. So this theme of emissions in residential building is the hard task of our plan. If we go to the services, the situation is quite different because we have very, in Bologna at least, a very big buildings where the emissions are in some way controlled by people in charge for energy consumption, what we call energy managers. For example, you see the trade fair, which is a district, the university, which is a group of many buildings scattered in the city, some big hospitals, and so on. So the good news with services is that in that case, we have some very big premises where it is easier and it's even economically interesting to intervene from energetic point of view. And as a matter of fact, many interventions, even with the support of European funding, many interventions have been done on those buildings. If we go to mobility, the characteristic of many Italian cities is that a lot of people rely on transport by their own car, which is different from other European countries, but in Italy, private car is really used very much. We have more or less a vehicle for 50 vehicles per 100 inhabitants, so a vehicle any two people. What is the problem with public transport? The problem with public transport is that we only have roads, so we don't have an underground train, we don't have effective bus lanes, so the speed of public transport is the same speed of the car in the traffic jam. So it's not really an considered as an effective alternative